I'd like to call the Brattleboro Select Board meeting of Tuesday, April 16th, 2024 to order. And there was no executive session this evening. And first question is to John Potter. Has this meeting been properly warned?
Yes, Liz, it was properly warned.
Thank you. All right. First order of business is to approve the minutes of April 2nd, 2024. May I have a motion to that effect? Thank you, Richard. Yes?
Yeah, I think he did.
Oh,
You have to say it out loud.
Well, I
motion.
I move to accept the minutes of April 2nd.
great. Richard has moved to accept the minutes of April 2nd. All in favor, say aye.
Discussion, please.
Is there a discussion?
Yes, there is. In line 112, there's a typographical error. It talks about the fund balance police review, and it should be policy review. Might be confusing to someone who would think that it involved the police department.
Good catch. Thank you, Franz. Anything else to discuss? Okay, let's go back to that vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes 4-0. And chair's remarks. I have none. Town manager's comments. John?
Yes, I have a few things. Tonight, the Town of Brattleboro Water Department's annual Consumer Confidence and Water Quality Report for 2023 is now available on the town website, brattleboro.gov. And printed copies are available at the Department of Public Works and the town clerk's office. If you have any questions about your water quality, please give the DPW a call at 802-257-2320. Speaking of water, DPW will start the annual water main flushing this Friday, April 19th, and will continue with both nighttime and day flushing through Friday, May 3rd. Water users who get a short period of discolored water or air in their water lines from the flushing should run cold water for a few minutes to clear out the distribution. The town was informed about legislation that Senator Welch introduced last week to direct $1 billion to professional nonprofit theaters that have seen a decline in revenues or benefit historically underserved communities throughout the country. Brattleboro was asked to endorse this legislation, which could be used to help underwrite workforce development, rent, set building, and marketing. And unless I hear otherwise from the board, I would communicate the town's general support for this bill. The board has you all had a presentation on the farm and food system assessment at your February 16th meeting. And I wanted to let you know that lead researchers Emma Bliss and Carissa Bruton will be giving a final presentation on their work on Tuesday, April 23rd at 7:30 p.m. at the Brooks Memorial Library Community Room. And finally, the Brattleboro Recreation and Parks Department is still taking registration for summer camps and programs. Although space may be getting limited, you can register in person at the Rec and Parks office at 207 Main Street or online at brattleboro.gov. And that's all I have for tonight, Liz.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, fellow select board members, do you have comments or committee reports? Franz?
One comment, thank you, Liz. I've actually had a couple of inquiries in recent days about whether my office hours are still going on in the new Select Board year, and the answer is yes. Anyone who wishes to talk to me about Select Board business or practically anything else can come to the Works Cafe on Main Street Wednesdays from 4:30 to 6:30, Fridays from 8 to 10 in the morning. There may be some changes in the hours as this year develops, but for now, we're doing the same thing we were doing last year. So come on down, and I'll be happy to talk to whoever shows up.
And let me add, of course, you know that the rest of the select board is also available to discuss whatever citizens may wish. Anyone else? Okay. Public participation. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? What about on Zoom? Patrick, I can't see that, so you'll have to tell me.
No hands up at this time.
Very good, thank you. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. John?
Yes, there are 4 items on the consent agenda tonight. If you approve this agenda, you will be approving the award of the 2024 line striping contract to K5 Corporation of Rockland, Mass. in the amount of $16,474.68. I will note that DPW is tentatively planning to visit with the board at your first meeting in May to do a policy review of all summer DPW work, including line striping. Secondly, you would be approving the award of the 2024 crack seal project contract to Seal Coating Inc. of Braintree, Mass. for a total of $60,461 to preserve pavement around town. You'll be accepting a grant of up to $44,176 from the Municipal Highway and Stormwater Mitigation Grant Program for a scoping study of Black Mountain Road to look at improvements that could reduce sedimentation going into Crosby Brook. And finally, you will be accepting a $144,356 grant from the State Transportation Alternatives Program for the design and construction of approximately 450 feet of new sidewalk on Fairground Road to connect the existing sidewalk by Red Clover Commons to the existing sidewalk at the high school.
Excellent, thank you. All right, may I have a motion to, well, is there any discussion, or does anyone want to pull any of the items on the consent agenda? Seeing none, may I have a motion? Franz?
I'd like to move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Franz. Franz has moved that we accept the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
We are 4-0 again. All right. New business. We have the Connecticut River FERC relicensing. And let's ask Sue to speak to that matter. Sue Fillion, the planning director. Hi, Sue.
Hi, good evening. So bringing before you a letter that I'm asking that the select board approves to send as Town of Brattleboro comments to the Vernon Dam relicensing that's finally, after years and years of saying they were going to get there, is kind of coming to a close. There is a public comment period until late last week was public comments were due on April 22nd. They late last week extended it to May 22nd, but this was already warned, so the letter is before you tonight. They would be the town's comments expressing, our local concerns. Brattleboro is in the impound area of the Vernon Dam. The impound area is all the way along the Connecticut, the length of our border, and then it goes to about the I-91 bridge on the West River. The comments were crafted by staff. I wrote the letter with the input of a working group of planning commissioners and conservation commissioners. Both of those committees and commissions have reviewed the letter. The planning commission didn't have a quorum in April, so they weren't able to sign off, but the chair of the conservation commission has. Had a lot of help from the Connecticut River Conservancy and Kathy Erfer, who might be in the room with you. So if you have questions, she might be able to help you as well about process and where certain aspects of the relicensing are at. But they provided a lot of good information that was helpful in writing the letter. Our comments focus primarily, on a couple of areas: recreation and improving the recreation facilities along the Connecticut River and along the West River are a focus of the letter. Some of our facilities are, we don't really have any here in Brattleboro, but some of the ones along the Connecticut River are not as well maintained as some of the facilities over in Wilmington, for example. So we're asking them to improve facilities, to take a look at the island. That is an area that was impacted when the dam was constructed. We lost a lot of land was lost there, and it's not really well maintained. So we think that this is an area that Great River Hydro could come up with a plan to improve. It asks them to look at a trail along the Connecticut River. The thinking there is that there's a lot of regulatory challenges there, and if anybody could do it and have the resources and maybe the time to do that, it would be Great River Hydro as part of a major plan. This is a license for 30 years, if not more, so they could take some time and do that. We're asking that they do a cultural resource management plan that takes into input from the Abenaki tribes and their representatives. The Abenaki are not a federally recognized tribe, so they haven't been able to have input. They weren't consulted in the cultural resource management plan that was done. There is a settlement agreement on migratory fish passage. We're asking that they implement it quicker than what the settlement agreement had offered. And I should go back to the West River. We're asking for improvements in the boat launch area that's on the retreat meadow. That's kind of a no man's land. VTrans doesn't claim it. It's not the town of Brattleboro. It is within the impoundment area, and it looks like it may have been created at some point in the previous licensing. So we're asking for improvements there. Also asking them to look at a recreational trail that would cross the West River, perhaps under the I-91 bridge, like a design had been made for. And then finally, some monitoring and management plans for controlling invasive species, both ones in the water as well as on the land, and then creating and implementing a plan to monitor and report water quality. So those are the comments that we think the town of Brattleboro should submit.
Kathy, for their long-term commitment to this project and putting together a really nice set of comments for us. Is there any discussion about the comments from board members?
Yes, I find this very interesting, but I do have a couple of questions to raise. I don't quite understand the bigger context. Now, Sue, you just mentioned that this would be maybe a 30-plus years license that would be issued. Is that how these things work, that such prolonged timelines? And during that time period, does the town or the communities, do they have, what kind of input would they have into the questions that are raised here? What's the bigger picture?
Actually, can I call on Kathy to help answer that question? Would that be okay?
Yeah, so under federal law, the timeline has been set from each license is issued for a period of 30 to 50 years. As we've been working on this, so the relicensing aspect of this has been going on since 2012. So we're going on year 12 of the relicensing process in anticipation of a probably 40-year license. Once the license is issued, it is very difficult. There's really no opportunity to revisit what may have been put in that license. There are some very limited, specific, like reopener situations, but FERC is pretty consistently likes to structure a license in a way so that it is clear to the company what would be expected of them and that they don't have to really revisit that for the period of time, until they go through the next relicensing period. So in terms of the process, in an ideal situation, a company at this point would have provided in their license application a proposal including a lot of detail for what they would provide for mitigation under the license. In this case, Great River Hydro has not provided that level of detail. They are expecting FERC to require, as a post-licensing requirement essentially, for some of the details to be hammered out. So this is the final comment period in front of FERC on this final application. Following the, at the same time that this is occurring, the state has to issue what's called a 401 water quality certification, and there will be a public process with opportunity to comment over the next 12 months in the state process. And then FERC also has to develop an environmental impact statement under NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, which will also occur over the next 12 months, and there'll be a public process there. So what we're anticipating, when we've reached out to all of the towns to encourage them to comment, because this is really the last opportunity to express to FERC and express to the company what might be potential opportunities in the towns for mitigation, right? And what areas of concern certain towns, may be concerned about. So the towns, by providing sort of this level of detail of potential recreation mitigation or other forms of mitigation for particular towns, that puts that information in front of FERC and also in front of the company. What will likely occur is that FERC will issue a license that says, one of the license articles, Great River Hydro, you must develop a recreation plan within X number of years. And so there will likely be another phase of planning. Ideally, that would be done with a great deal of transparency and involvement of all of the towns, Great River Hydro, the stakeholders, right? So that they can kind of come up with a comprehensive recreation plan to serve as mitigation that they would then implement over, the beginning of the next license terms. Often in these situations, the company is required to do something like that, and they end up putting up a big capital investment at the beginning of this long license. And then 20 years down the line, the things are sort of falling apart, and there isn't maintenance funds. And so, our hope is to ideally have license terms that require potentially upkeep, maintenance money, mitigation funding would be great, but we'll have to see how all that washes out over the course of the next steps of the process. Does that help?
Yes, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
Should I go right ahead? Okay. So when do you think the license might actually be issued?
At earliest would be around this time next year, because we have to wait for the 401 process and wait for the NEPA process. And the result of both of those processes also inform what's in the license. So, for instance, the conditions that the state may put in a 401 water quality certification automatically become part of the license. So at the earliest, I would say 12 months from now, and then assuming, CRC is an advocacy organization, so if we get a good license, then that'll be great. We'll move on from there. It may be if we get a bad license out of FERC in a year, we may end up appealing that depending on what they choose to include or not include.
So a year or more.
Yeah.
You're thinking, okay. And that license will presumably include something about recreational improvements or something. But it won't say what they are, because there will be a whole planning process after that. What happens if we're a few years down the road, Great River has their license, and we're not happy about the recreation plan? What avenues would be open in a situation like that?
Yeah, and we'll see how that recreation planning process proceeds. I would encourage the towns to be engaged in that. And I'm sort of in the privileged position to have this as my full-time job, to be able to pay attention. So over the course of the past 7 years, since I've been in this position, I've continually come back to the towns and other organizations like the Connecticut River Joint Commissions to sort of help move the next part of the process along. So I would say, the town has an interest in being involved in those discussions when they occur. And then, you similarly, that plan would have to be approved by FERC. So there's similarly maybe an opportunity to communicate directly with FERC on that.
So it would be up to FERC really to say, hey, this plan doesn't meet our standards, but they've already given them a license. So do they unlicense them, or what happens?
No, the license, and Liz could probably chime in here. The license permits them to continue to generate electricity using the facilities and the river. In the license are numerous articles defining how they do that, exactly how they do that, right? And so the development of a recreation plan and what they provide for recreation mitigation is one aspect of their requirements under the license. There may be things like, they may have to develop a shoreline management plan, or they may have to develop an erosion control plan, or as Sue mentioned about invasives, right? There may be some things they have to do in terms of how they're managing their own lands for invasives. But in addition to that, the license dictates, the exact amount that they can change in the impoundment in terms of surface water, right? It dictates a bunch of other details, right? Like how much flowage would be required to go from Bellows Falls into the bypass reach, which is the dry riverbed, since most of the water goes through the canal. So there's numerous articles in the license that outlines really specific constraints around what they can and cannot do, and how they operate, and what they have to do for mitigation.
So it's actually complicated.
It's very complicated. Yeah.
That's a sufficient answer. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Richard.
So all of these few pages of comments and recommendations go to FERC. Will they get back to the town with a response of whether they're going to include these into their process, or they don't like them, or will we know how they react to what we tell them?
Only if you subscribe to the FERC docket and pay attention to the process, which is partly what we're doing as the advocates. So yeah, there is a public process through FERC to subscribe and be able to track and get emails for how FERC responds to these things and what they require. So if you want to go down that route, I'm glad to
But you're
connect with that
keeping
information.
track of this, so you might tell us, oh no, they don't like any of this, and they're not going to.
FERC is not going to make a ruling on these specific requests from the town of Brattleboro. FERC is aggregating the comments to understand what is needed in the region, right? And this relicensing, it's all 3 dams, so it's 124 miles of river, 30 towns. So the individual comments from the towns are informing FERC as to what the big picture is and what they need to include as requirements. They're not going to say in the town of Brattleboro do X. They're going to tell the company to develop a recreation plan, and through that process, that's when we'll get kind of into the details of specific responses from the company in terms of what they will do, what they won't do,
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah.
Peter?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. So it seems to me, Kathy, that we'd like to rely on you once again when the 401 process is and when the NEPA process is, because those seem like a more forceful way to regulate what the mitigation measures are for the dam rather than these kind of wishing and hoping letters. So if we could rely on you to work with Sue to have, these same set of comments for the 401 process and for the NEPA process, that would be nice.
Yeah, we're absolutely committed to doing that. And even through the 401 process, I'm hoping to have, even to understand what a 401 is, you have to understand the Clean Water Act and water quality standards. So we're hoping to do public education in general about this. But yes, we will also specifically be reaching out to the towns to make sure they know, like, when there's an opportunity to comment, when there's public hearings. And, the one difference I think between commenting to FERC and commenting in the 401 is that the 401 is limited by what is specifically in our state water quality standards, in each state's water quality standards, right? So Vermont has some things in our water quality standards, for instance, that New Hampshire doesn't even consider. Under FERC, it's kind of a larger picture of things to comment on. So, for instance, the comments on cultural resources doesn't fall so clearly under water quality standards, whereas in Vermont, recreation would, issues of erosion would. Even in Vermont, we have water quality standards around aesthetics, but for instance, in New Hampshire, they don't. So, I think you have opportunities to comment on certain things in front of FERC that you may not necessarily be able to engage with when it comes to the
But in terms of
quality.
NEPA, I mean, if we're suggesting mitigation areas. So obviously that would fall under the environmental impact review.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Yes.
And thank you too. Anybody else have are there members online who might like to comment? All right, then let's have a motion. Would someone like to make a motion regarding?
I'll motion.
Thank you.
I'll motion to approve the letter to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission regarding the relicensing of the Vernon Dam.
Great. Any further discussion on that? Seeing none, all select board members in favor of the motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
4-0. Thank you very much. Kathy, Sue, thank you very much. Okay, next item is 8B, Solid Waste Program Update. Patrick, take it away.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
So this is an update this evening on developments of our future solid waste program. There's nothing specific being requested of the board. There's no action that needs to be taken tonight. Just a little follow-up from recent activities. So as we've discussed previously, the current contract for solid waste collection in Brattleboro comes to its conclusion on June 30th. And for this reason, back in February, the Select Board authorized staff to proceed with a request for qualifications process to help identify who might be our next solid waste hauler. We were seeking letters of interest from qualified firms, and notice was published in the paper, and it was sent directly to 10 different firms, both inside and outside of Vermont. Only one firm completed the task and was responsive to the request, and that packet was submitted to us by Casella. Based on this, a meeting was held recently on April 8th with members of the town manager's office, myself and Mr. Potter, and representatives from Casella. The meeting was collegial, productive, and informative. We all agreed that substantive program changes are going to require adequate time and plenty of public education. We agreed that the town belongs soliciting input from the public, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And Casella identified either a deal maker or a deal breaker, depending upon how you look at it. That being that they were very much interested in a contract with the town on the condition that it incorporate a transition to automated collection. Now, automated collection, for those who may not be familiar with it, it's really not so much automated as mechanized, But this is the process whereby specialized carts are left curbside, and a truck with a single driver and a single employee has a joystick and some cameras, and they can reach out, pick up that container, and drop the contents into the back of the truck. There's a number of reasons why this is considered ideal within the industry. Firstly, fewer employees are required, and the solid waste industry, like a lot of industries, like municipalities, for example, are struggling to keep positions filled. So this reduces the overall number of employees required to fulfill the contract. The second is that fewer workers also means fewer workplace injuries. Historically, trash trucks would proceed through the town. You'd have a driver. The driver was generally pretty safe. It was the person in the back who was oftentimes physically picking up trash cans or trash bags or boxes of things that could have dangerous items in them, lifting them using their own muscle power, and at the same time trying to dodge vehicular traffic. That person was frequently had a much more dangerous position. And so the transition to automated collection is largely about reducing the number of employees required to accomplish the task and to provide a safer workplace for those employees that remain. The bottom line with us is that a solid waste contract involving the town and Casella is going to require a transition to automated collection. Staff have also identified a number of different options around which we could possibly engage with Casella. Now, there is the sort of standard contract. This is the kind of contract that the town has had with Triple T for years and years and years, where there is a one-to-one relationship between the town and Casella, the hauler. This is straightforward, easily understood, and we can move forward with that type of engagement. But there are also other types of engagements that we've identified, such as a franchise. A franchise arrangement differs from a standard contract in that the town's role is to negotiate the options, but not necessarily have the relationship with the hauler. That would be a one-to-one relationship between the hauler and each resident, leaving the town somewhat outside. We've negotiated the terms, right? And we've negotiated the pricing, but we step away from the being directly involved in the contract. The relationship is between the franchise holder, Casella, and the residents of Brattleboro. We'll see if that's something the board or the public would like to move forward on. We're seeking pricing in all of these different combinations, so we'll be able to evaluate that and the pros and cons of it. There is one other nuance that can be accomplished with the franchise model. For years, we have been fairly successful at diverting our solid waste away from the landfill. This is by promoting recycling and by promoting organics collection for use in composting. If these are services the town would like to continue to promote, we could adopt a franchise arrangement whereby there is a one-to-many relationship between Casella and the residents of Brattleboro around the issue of trash. But on the issue of composting and recycling, the municipality is contracted. So we could make it as easy as possible to continue to promote those diversion activities while at the same time stepping away from the trash engagement and leaving that between the customer and the company. There are a lot of issues to explore, and we're trying to identify and explore each of them, particularly around issues like the frequency of collection. At the present time, recycling and organics are collected weekly, while trash is collected every other week. But we're going to be interested to find out if that's the way we should be doing it, or if people would like it done perhaps every week for all streams, or perhaps every other week for all streams. There are some other issues related to pay-as-you-throw that are going to come into play here. we have to comply with the requirements of the state legislature, but how we do so is really up to us. The current system involves the use of pay-as-you-throw bags that are sold by local retail establishments, but it can be done other ways. And depending upon the particular contract style, we could conceivably do it like this. If it was a franchise, we could negotiate that Casella would offer a small, medium, or large cart, and the choice is really yours, depending upon what your household needs and what the needs of your household are. If it's under a standard contract arrangement where it's just the town and Casella at play, we could provide a base cart included within the contract, but then if your household needs something in addition to that, you could contract for a second cart with Casella outside of the town service. This would comply with the rules of the law, and each of these options would actually enable us to step away from the bag program, which may or may not be desirable. We'll certainly find out. Ultimately, what we think is most important at this moment in time is to begin to gauge public interest in some of the different options available for our solid waste program. And so in order to proceed, what the town manager's office plans to do either later this week or early next week is to start out on a two-pronged approach. First prong is going to be an online survey that will seek input. How important is it to your household that trash, recycling, or organics is picked up weekly? Is every other week okay? And to get some sense as to if it's every other week and weekly would be more expensive, how much more expensive would make it worth your while? So we'll be asking a series of questions along those lines. But because we think this is something that really would benefit from a slightly deeper dive, the town manager's office is going to establish a series of different advisory groups. We're envisioning 4 different 5-person advisory groups. And we'd like to think of them somewhat along these lines. We'd like a group made up of members of representative town meeting. We'd like a group made up of renters. We'd like a group made up of folks who live in a West Brattleboro neighborhood. And we'd like a group of folks who live somewhere in a downtown neighborhood. We'll be asking those folks for all kinds of information. Where, on what street do you live? Do you rent or own? Questions like, do you identify as a member of an underrepresented group? We're going to be trying to fill these positions with a broad range of folks to help sort of have deeper conversations about these different issues. We're envisioning that these might take 2 meetings, one with each of the groups probably before we get pricing, and then maybe one with each of these groups after we get pricing to kind of see, all right, we identified this as maybe our primary objective, but now that we know the cost, does that change our view at all? Are we really more able to accept this? And so what John and I hope to be able to do is to be able to conduct those through the end of April and on through May, to gather input both from the online survey, from these advisory groups, to combine that with pricing information that we work out with Casella, and then begin to have a conversation with the board to try and tie all this together and decide how to proceed into the future.
Well, thank you, Patrick. That was very thorough. Are there members of the Select Board who have questions? Yes, Franz.
Well, I guess my question would be the timeline. I mean, there's a lot of material here and many, many questions that come to my mind. I'm not going to try to ask all of them tonight, but the timeline, I think, is really important. And our contract is up June 30th. That's 2 months and a couple of weeks. The information gathering process you've outlined is pretty ambitious, although I'm not 100% sure it's ambitious enough in terms of the size of the focus groups, which I'm not sure you're going to get as broad a net as would really benefit the process. And I know in some prior discussions there was the thought that maybe we would extend our current, yes, if we're going to stay with Casella, we're going to need to do this mechanized collection system, but maybe we don't need to start that July 1st. So, I mean, those are the big questions in my mind. How are we going to implement this in a really good way? Because that's what's really important to me.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I don't envision at this point in time we'd be transitioning to that new manner of collection July 1st. I think based on the conversations that we've had with Casella, I'm not confident they'd be ready on July 1st either. So the question is, during the life of the contract, and the term of the contract is yet to be determined, but during the life of that contract, presumably sooner rather than later, we would agree to proceed through this transition. And any transition of that sort of magnitude is something that will benefit from as much public education as possible. I have witnessed over the years great resiliency in the public, particularly in the area of solid waste. But in order to sort of tap into that resiliency, you really need to, hey folks, this is going to be coming. Hey folks, look, it's still coming. Hey folks, it's getting a little closer. Hey look, it's here. Hey, remember that? We did that. Remember? And so there's going to need to be a certain amount of aggressive public education in order to make these transitions successful.
And I just want to throw in that I had a conversation with a friend the other day whose wife for Christmas bought him a huge number of town garbage bags as a gift. And he says, what am I going to do with all my garbage bags? So if there was a long enough time period to use up the existing supplies, that would be good.
Yep.
Yes, Richard.
Based on what you discussed with the people from Casella, they'd be willing to extend the date of the current contract under the current terms of the contract if they're not ready or we're not ready?
I think and John, correct me if you think I'm venturing too far afield, that at our present point of discussion, we are working on a contract that would begin July 1, but with a transition date that is yet to be set in terms of the transition to automated collection.
I guess I don't understand what that means. So July 1st,
Yep.
the new contract.
Yep.
But what if we haven't worked out the details?
Well, I think the details we're going to largely work out between now and June 30. However, they may not be implemented on July 1. Maybe it's a September 30 implementation. Maybe it's a January 1 implementation. We've got to sort of get there in the discussions, but that would be contained within the contract period.
So what you're saying is there'll probably be a lag between, you'll have a written plan or an agreement on what to do, but we may not actually do that for a period of time.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's certainly my understanding. We'll have an agreement that begins July 1, and we'll both agree that during the term of the agreement, 6 months into it, we'll do this. Or I'm not trying to be specific when I say 6 months. What I'm saying is that the contract will specify when that transition will occur.
So people could use up their trash bags in between.
Or they could sell
And we'll
them
certainly
in the
have to
black
come up with a
market.
plan because there's going to be some out there, and they will lose value.
Peter, do you have any comments?
I am good.
All right. I am as well. Again, I know there's a comment there. Kathy, you have any comments?
I guess my one comment or suggestion is for the working groups, whether the town can provide a stipend for people to attend those, just to create some equity and access to that.
It's a good point. Our plan has been to provide a stipend of $25 for each meeting attendance. So, think that's important as well.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Patrick. David?
Oh, thank you.
Very much. I'd like a little bit of reassurance, and if you reassure me, then I have a follow-up question. Our current activities or practices in terms of recycling and composting would continue, correct?
Patrick?
David, I would say that is certainly our plan.
And then so I'm half reassured. The second piece of this is that necessarily going to be done by Casella, or might there be an alternative way of doing those collections of compost and recyclables?
At this point in time, we have only the one firm that's interested in that body of business, so to speak. So, I believe if we're going to have a curbside collection program that involves organics and recycling, it's going to need to involve Casella. And, my expectation, and I believe the data we collect from the public will certainly back this up, that the diversion efforts we've been working on for literally years and years and years are meaningful to the public and to the community. And so I don't foresee any serious likelihood that those will be left behind.
Okay. Thank you.
So just to expand on David's comment, so recycling and composting that we do in Brattleboro currently is not Vermont law. It's what Brattleboro has determined to do.
So there are applicable laws, right? It is illegal, for example, to throw legitimate recycling into the trash and to make its way into the landfill. One is surely permitted to compost organics at home. There is no legal obligation for the town to have a organized collection program in the manner that we do. And many towns, both larger and smaller, and near and far, play no role whatsoever in solid waste collection. If you look at Montpelier, they're completely not involved. If you look at Keene, they're not involved. If you look at Burlington, they pick up recycling, but they play no role in trash. So Brattleboro's got what folks at the Agency of Natural Resources consider to be a Cadillac program. And they love our Cadillac program, and I believe they hope we love it too, and we'll be looking to sustain it in the years to come.
And then the information that you're gathering, you'll provide to the public the benefits of our current system and how much waste, how much recycling, and how much composting is removed from the trash flow.
We can certainly do an update on that type of thing.
Yeah, I think it's important for the town to know the sustainability elements that are inherent in our current system, so that we hopefully endeavor to maintain that.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, as you recall, I think it was 2016 when we transitioned to pay-as-you-throw, overnight, trash volumes were cut in half, and organics collection doubled.
Yeah. And I remember people being very trepidatious about that program, but it seems to be working very well, and certainly as intended.
For a lot of households, I think it does work and work pretty well. There are some that it doesn't work very well for. Households with medical waste, households with diapers, households, there are a number of instances where it's not really working for them. Mm-hmm. But
and presumably in this process, we might even identify measures that would be flexible to those households.
We will do our best to try and identify those.
Great.
at some point, we often find ourselves stuck needing to create a program for thousands of households, and it can't be tailor-made to everybody, but we can do our best.
Great. Thank you very much, Patrick. Anyone else have anything to say on that score? No. Then we'll just thank Patrick. And that seems to be the end of our meeting. Does anyone have one final motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Peter. Peter has motioned to adjourn. Is there any discussion?
It's non-debatable.
All in favor, raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
4-0 again. Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Kathy.
All right.
Well done.
So that happened.